In 2018, our research group started work on building knowledge of the exotic fly spotted-winged Drosophila, which is also known as Drosophila suzukii. This pest is becoming a pest of concern for berry and stone fruit industries around the world. Throughout this project, we've been working towards a goal of increasing preparedness of our plant industries for a possible incursion of spotted wing, as well as increasing our capability to respond to a detection should one occur. The research team has been collecting information and knowledge on surveillance and control methods and has also been developing models which will help us predict how well Australian regions and conditions will support spotted-winged Drosophila, and this will give us an idea on how far this pest could spread and establish. Educating potentially affected industries has also been a really crucial part of the project because it will be critical if we're going to achieve early detection of spotted wing and also allow us to respond to this pest should it arrive. This video tutorial has been developed to educate you, your colleagues or your students on the importance about spotted wing. This research has been a collaborative effort between Plant Health Australia, Plant and Food Research New Zealand and Cesar, and has been made possible with funding from Hort Innovation, using the strawberry, raspberry, cherry, blackberry and summer fruit research and development levies, and also contributions from the Australian Government.
Following on from the previous talk of the spread and establishment potential of spotted-winged Drosophila in Australia, in this talk I will summarise the impact potential of spotted-winged Drosophila. A pest may have the potential to spread to a location, but this does not mean it will cause impacts. We also need to look at the commodities grown in that region and the vulnerability to the pest. Similarly, just because a vulnerable commodity is being grown does not mean it will be impacted. The new pest will require a pathway for spread and suitable environmental locations at the destination. But before we jump into impacts, I want to take a quick detour into how spotted-winged Drosophila actually damages soft fruit. This picture of spotted-winged Drosophila, with its distinctive wing spots, is the male of the species. This is a picture of a female, in which you can see the lack of wing spots. She does have something else, however, that makes her quite special, and this is the highly specialized ovipositor, which you can probably see from this picture is quite distinctive with its large size and serrated edges. These separate spotted-winged Drosophila from other Drosophila species, which are extremely common and widespread, but lack the ability to pierce the soft skin of intact fruit. A study by Atala et al. Compared the evolutionary history of spotted-winged Drosophila's ovipositor and demonstrated the evolutionary steps that allowed it to obtain its global pest status. As we move across the evolutionary tree from left to right, only spotted-winged Drosophila, Drosophila suzukii, and Drosophila subpulchrella, a cousin from southwest China, uniquely acquired a few things. They acquired an increased ovipositor area, modified ovipositor bristles, which became enlarged and darker, a sharper ovipositor tip, and the ability to puncture the skin of soft fruits like raspberries and cherries. Then we see Drosophila suzukii diverge from Drosophila subpulchrella and uniquely acquire a streamlined ovipositor with an increased length to width ratio, as well as the ability to puncture the skin of thicker fruits like grapes. And for soft fruit growers, this is the unfortunate result of these evolutionary steps. The large serrated ovipositor of spotted-winged Drosophila can readily pierce the skin of many soft fruits, which cause primary damage through larval feeding, but also secondary damage through the introduction of pathogens and feeding from other insects, as shown in these second two pictures of cherries. So what does this actually mean in terms of crop loss? Well, here we reviewed international reports of the proportion of crop losses attributed to spotted-winged Drosophila and summarized them into this frequency plot. The height of the bars shows the frequency of a given report of damage, which is reported on the horizontal axis. The first thing to notice is that across all commodities, there is large variation in the reported crop loss, but there does seem to be some trends. Blackberries, raspberries, and blueberries seem to have more frequent reports of higher losses, while strawberries and table grapes have less frequent reports of high losses. Spotted-winged Drosophila can affect other commercial commodities, but these plots show the top 6 most reported commodities from overseas data. If we plot all of these reports against the number of years from the first detection in the particular region, we see an interesting trend. As time spent with the pest increases, the reported losses tend to go down from a very high initial loss in the first 3 years to lower than 10% after 6 years. It is important to note that these reports are probably biased towards higher losses, as smaller infestations will likely go unnoticed or unreported. As I mentioned earlier, the location of affected commodities varies across Australia, and it is important to take this into account when calculating impact potential. Here I have plotted data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics on the annual value of production of 6 important commodity groups. This helps us understand where and to what industries impacts will most likely occur. To do this, we take all of these commodity values and combine them into a gridded estimate of production value. When we combine all of the values of affected commodities, this is what we get in terms of gridded estimates. These gridded estimates are useful because we can now overlay the previous model of spread into Australia to estimate impact potential as the pest moves across the country following an incursion. In these plots, we have run incursion scenarios from major capital cities, which represents a range of environmental conditions and human population densities to see how impacts could accumulate through time. These are unmitigated impacts, assuming no management. In addition, crop losses were assumed to be 10% of production value to focus on the role of spatial variation in crop production and temporal environmental suitability. The fixed value of 10% was taken as a reasonable estimate across the different commodity groups, acknowledging bias towards the reporting of higher losses and minor losses which may go unnoticed. To simplify the wide variation that has also been observed, even within commodities, this was also useful. To adjust this assumption, impact estimates can be easily scaled, for example, multiplied by 2 if we want to see what a 20% crop loss would be. Simulations are replicated 10 times to capture randomness in spread pathways. These plots break up national impacts by commodity type, but if we look at the last plot at the bottom labeled with total, we can see that depending on the incursion location, total impacts can vary from $17 to $61 million within the first 3 years of an incursion. Most of this damage can be accounted for by strawberries, blueberries, cherries, and caneberries. We can break impacts down by commodity and jurisdiction, so we only count costs incurred in each state. We can also throw in some additional simulated incursions at other locations less populated than capital cities. For cherries, we see the largest impacts will be expected in Tasmania and South Australia. An incursion into Hobart could cause $10 million worth of losses after 3 years. For strawberries, we see very large unmitigated impacts in the order of $30 million in Queensland and $10 million in Victoria after 3 years, due to the close proximity of major cities and suitable environmental conditions. Tasmania is a situation where an incursion from a less populated area, Devonport, will result in more rapidly accruing impacts compared to a more populated incursion location like Hobart. Relatively few impacts are expected for table grapes, with the exception of an incursion into Mildura. In these simulations, the impacts increase rapidly but become flat after the population goes extinct due to the hot and dry conditions in northwest Victoria. Nevertheless, some large impacts will be possible for even small outbreaks due to the large production value produced in such a small region. Nectarines and other stone fruit are expected to have their highest impacts from incursions into Perth, which surpass $1.5 million after 3 years. Incursions into Geraldton could also cause large impacts, but with higher uncertainty due to the required jumps spotted-winged Drosophila would need to make to reach key production zones. Large caneberry impacts were expected across a number of jurisdictions, but particularly Victoria, under incursions from Melbourne. Blueberry impacts were largest in New South Wales, Queensland and Tasmania. Incursions into New South Wales caused large potential losses, but with a large amount of uncertainty. In the previous plots, I only tested a small number of possible incursion scenarios, so that the plots didn't have hundreds of lines. But as a tool to help further explore other possible incursion scenarios, we have made an interactive map with hundreds of thousands of preloaded spread simulations. You simply click on the map to see an estimated probability of spread to a location within 12 months. The location of production regions can also be overlaid to assess risk under different incursion scenarios. The spotted-winged Drosophila has emerged as an international pest that poses a threat to Australia's significant fruit production industries valued at $4.8 billion. While presently absent from Australia, our previous work has shown highly suitable conditions for establishment and spread across Australian farming regions. Here we conducted the first international literature review on crop losses where mean reported crop losses varied substantially, but impacts were typically within 20 to 50% in the first 2 years following establishment and decreasing to under 10% after 6 years. This suggests that better preparedness and a rapid transition to better management practices can avoid most of these early high losses. Using simulations of incursions, the estimated unmanaged impacts of spotted-winged Drosophila in Australia were particularly high for southeastern soft fruit growing industries, but different industries and different jurisdictions had different sensitivities. Depending on the incursion location, predicted national accumulated impacts after 3 years varied from $16.6 to $61.3 million, reflecting rapid spread into its suitable range. Most impacts were predicted to occur in southeastern Australia, particularly Queensland and Victoria, due to substantial strawberry, cherry, and caneberry growing regions. Importantly, impacts did not necessarily scale with the size of the affected industry, but also depended on the environmental suitability and isolation of each industry's production regions. These same factors also led to the incursion location associated with the highest impacts varying for each industry, which may lead to different biosecurity priorities for each industry.